Hannah Cox claims the prosecution of Ross Ulbricht was corrupt, but the only corruption she describes is a political quid pro quo to exempt a popular person from the law.
In honor of her and the Libertarian movement, which supported me so strongly, it was my pleasure to have just signed a full and unconditional pardon of her son, Ross.
Libertarians help promote Trump's propaganda that the irrational mob protects popular people from courts and law, when it is courts and law that protect nameless nobodies from the irrational mob.
The scum that worked to convict him were some of these same lunatics who are involved in the modern-day weaponization of government against me.
The executive branch is the weapon of the popular will. By having million-dollar lawyers and appointing the judges, Trump was better protected from the weaponization of government than anyone in history. But he has idiot libertarians abandoning the only protection of their rights, preferring executive branch demagogues doing the will of the irrational mob. Hannah said some cops stole some money during the investigation.
2 federal agents, Carl Force and Sean Bridges, were convicted of stealing Bitcoin during the Silk Road investigation. Those agents were later sentenced for extortion, money laundering, and obstruction related to their investigation. So obviously the corruption here raises pretty serious concerns about the integrity of the entire operation, particularly considering the fact that these guys had access to administrative privileges on Silk Road, which would have allowed them to fabricate or alter evidence.
But Hannah has not alleged any evidence supporting Ulbricht's conviction was fabricated. Quite the opposite. Hannah has conceded Ulbricht intentionally made a website for the purpose to enable people to break the law.
Even started the Silk Road enterprise in part because of his views that the laws it circumvented were unjust. Like it was sort of a way of fighting the system. The website was meant to allow people to make transactions outside of the government's infrastructure of laws and using cryptocurrency so that their transactions could not be traced. So
other sites may have illegal activity, but they were not designed by some nerd who thinks it is his privilege to be cool and break the law.
There are lots of websites that have illegal activity happening on them. Typically, the government goes after the people who are committing the illegal activity on those websites. People who own and operate websites are not responsible for things that people say or do on them. They shouldn't be. That's not how liability works. Even started the Silk Road enterprise in part because of his views that the laws it circumvented were unjust. Like it was sort of a way of fighting the system. As this person pointed out, they gave Ross Ulbricht 2 life sentences for creating a website that other people used for illegal activity, but they don't go after the creators of websites that knowingly show child porn, rape, other sexual assault, and human trafficking. Ross's pardon has an unusual base of support comprised of people in the libertarian movement who have always opposed the war on drugs.
Pardoning Ross does not stop the war on drugs. It promotes unchecked executive branch power and propaganda and political corruption.
But also comprised of people within the MAGA movement who typically stringently oppose anyone who sells drugs or even consumes them, people who want to lock up more people for nonviolent crimes, and people who adamantly support the war on drugs and even revving it up. A lot of critics have pointed out this hypocrisy and noted that Trump's law and order stance is less about the law and more about who he likes.
Both groups agree on arbitrary executive power, the opposite of rights. Both sides support Trump's propaganda if they get something in return. They support propaganda used to attack their enemies and protect their friends, without being regulated by courts and laws passed by the legislature. Both sides think the will of the mob is more just and ethical than law and courts. Both sides want a dictator to rule the world based on whatever propaganda he can put out and whatever nonsense is popular on Twitter.
Personally, I think there is moral ambiguity in this matter. I think that taking a person's life away from them and putting them in a cell for the, quote, crime of doing something that doesn't harm anybody else but themselves is more unethical, that in this case, justice was served.
Hannah is saying that we should have a society run by ethics, meaning whatever is popular on Twitter, rather than by courts enforcing laws passed by elected representatives.
But it really had not gotten my attention in the same way some more high-level cases like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden had. I had been given some false information about his case that inclined me to think he was less deserving of a...
Hannah believes justice is discovered by popularity, misinformation, connections, and shouting the loudest on Twitter, rather than by courts measuring fact against law.
to hear right from her about what actually happened in the case, the problems with it. And it sent me down a rabbit hole where I realized a lot of what I had been told about this case was government propaganda and simply false, and that this guy was certainly deserving of mercy.
The popular will is not a place to look for mercy.
Now, clearly, as she was going about and speaking to the country and attending political events, she started to gain a lot of footing within libertarian circles, which were an easy coalition base to target, given the beliefs of libertarians that crimes are an abomination and shouldn't be on the books to begin with.
Freeing Ross did not legalize drugs. It made the war on drugs more politically acceptable by exempting a popular white guy. Freeing Ross made it easier to keep the laws on the books and keep up the war on drugs. Freeing Ross was a war on having popular people being subject to the same laws as everyone else.
Given the fact that libertarians are typically more principled when it comes to matters around the justice system, they understand that the government is always corrupt. They understand that there are frequently things that happen behind the scenes in many cases that put people in jail wrongfully. Like
Ross was not convicted using lies, and freeing him made it easier to keep lying in unpopular people's cases.
Are typically more principled when it comes to matters around the justice system. They understand that the government is always corrupt. They understand that there are frequently things that happen behind the scenes in many cases that put people in jail wrongfully. Like they were just inherently attracted to this case and the arguments against his sentence. Typically, people on the left have advocated for less harsh criminal sentences, which
Freeing Ross did not change sentences. It made it easier to not change sentences, just exempt popular people.
it's really weird watching Democrats who tend to be more aligned with me and my views on the criminal justice system go in the other direction and actually criticize Trump for this pardon. And it's just very confusing because the left allegedly, even 4 years ago, was very opposed to the war on drugs. I think the war on drugs has single-handedly done more to undermine the liberties of Americans, or it's used to undermine our Bill of Rights.
Freeing Ross did not end the war on drugs. It allowed white people to exempt their friends, while continuing the war on drugs in a political trade.
Ross did not try to people. This has been debunked, and I'll also get into the weeds on that. It's not hard to know these things, okay? I'm really kind of shocked at the people who pop off about cases like this without doing even just the smallest margin of research into the matter.
Hannah is the one who supports determining what is justice on Twitter, not using courts and laws.
Because of the money that was going down on this website, they wanted to get their hands on it. I mean, just look at these numbers that they access thanks to civil asset forfeiture, which is a corrupt practice that shouldn't even be allowed in this country. But
Freeing Ross did not return this money or end civil asset forfeiture, just buy off libertarians complaining about it.
Obviously, a lot of work needs to be done to fix that system, and I'm hopeful with Ross now free that he'll work to do just that.
Hannah worked for corruption exempting the privileged and for arbitrary executive power, deciding on Twitter, not for law or justice, but the opposite.
Pardon and